I'm chilling out here on the porch this afternoon to be able to talk to you just about some of the personal aspect of some of the problems and some of the problems that happen inside of our relationship and some of the fights. A lot of times people are curious to just like, what does life actually look like being with a narcissist? What does life actually look like dealing with narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder? And if you guys are new here, my name is Ben Taylor. I'm a self-aware narcissist on this channel just to provide awareness about narcissistic abuse and help people actually heal and get free from narcissistic. I work with people that have been stuck in narcissistic abusive relationships for a long period of time to be able to get the freedom that they haven't been able to find by being able to break the trauma bond, get rid of the triggers, and actually establish freedom in their life in all aspects. So I want to be able to help you with that. And if you have any questions about that, then go to rawmotivations.com. We'd love to be able to talk to you more inside of that. Dealing with me has not been an easy process or an easy thing at all for my wife. And even inside of my growth and my development, it still means that it's not perfect. There's still many times where we have different issues or frustrations. Probably one of the biggest frustrations is when I get like activated or triggered and I go from like 0 to 100. It's not always this piece where I'll like ramp up, where I'll be like, I'm annoyed, I'm frustrated, and then I'm just like pissed. Sometimes it's just like 0 to pissed. And inside of that, it makes it very difficult for her to be able to know what's going on. She's like, okay, like what's wrong with you? What's the problem? And oftentimes if I sit and I think about it, or I go back and figure out what it actually is, I'll figure out there'll be like a different stress or anxiety or a different pressure or something that happened, or that something was underlying the surface that I didn't really think of or know. So sometimes my wife will bring this up to me and I'll have this awareness of, oh, okay, I'm responding in a different way that I didn't think I was, or I'm responding in a way that I don't even know where this came from. And being able to dive into those conversations and to those concepts is very helpful, because she brings a huge piece of awareness to me, of me understanding and seeing and acknowledging of what's actually going on, of what's actually happening. So sometimes we'll have a fight and we'll have this argument or discussion that'll just pop up out of nowhere. And it's because I've been triggered, or something is already distracting me or pissing me off and confusing me to start off with. So then I'm trying to figure out how to navigate that mentally and emotionally, and I might be taking it out on her. Or I might be frustrating by the kids, and I might be just like overactivated. And so those times is when she brings it up. She's like, hey, you might need to take a moment. Now, one of the ways that can get very triggering is in correcting our kids. There's like a respect trigger there. There's like an argument trigger there. There's a couple of things that trigger me there. And sometimes it'll be in the moment where I will find myself arguing with a 5-year-old. And my wife's like, you know what you're doing, right? You're arguing with a 5-year-old. She doesn't even have logic. So like, why are you doing this? But inside those moments, there's almost a piece of me that gets triggered where I feel disrespected by my wife because I'm not getting the result that I want for my kid. Hopefully this makes sense. So sometimes there might be like an argument or frustration that's happening with a 5-year-old, and I'm getting pissed and I'm getting frustrated and I'm raising my voice or I'm raising my tone, and my wife will be like, take a moment, like take a pause. And in that moment, I feel this shame. And I feel ashamed because I'm not showing up how I want to show up. I'm showing up like in a way that's not helping my kid actually communicate or deal with their feelings or emotions. But in that moment, then what I want to do is I want to be able to get even more frustrated, get even more pissed, because my shame has been called out. And even though I've done a lot of work with shame has really changed a lot inside of my life. There's still aspects that I still have. Shame, it's still there. It's not like it's eradicated and gone. It's still a piece of me. It's still a piece of my life. So there's different pieces that activate it. And one is kind of that piece where it feels like in the moment that my wife's like, quote unquote, like correcting me in the moment. Well, it's not even a piece of correcting. She's trying to bring an awareness. But my mind wants to flip it around and shame myself. My mind wants to flip around and be exposed. My mind wants to flip around and get all frustrated and pissed off. And so when this is happening, it's helpful for me to like take a break and pull back. Now, the hard part is making sure that I actually take a break, because oftentimes me like pulling back means I'm just going to still be pissed and I'm not going to process it. So sometimes that means that I need to take a pause and I need to actually stack it. I need to sit down and actually write down what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what is actually happening, what's actually going on. So stacking has been a very powerful way to be able to deal with a lot of fights and a lot of issues that we've had inside of our marriage, because I'm able to use that as a way to be able to dump everything that I'm thinking and feeling inside of it and not have it lash out at other people. So I've had different stacks. I've done angry or rage stacks on my wife, and they've been extremely helpful, because then I'm getting out all of my rage, all of my frustration, all of my pissed offness in the moment, but I'm dumping it into a stack. I'm dumping it into just like a virtual journaling system that gives me actual actions out the backside of what I need to do differently. Every single time I do this, it helps reframe my mindset, helps me change how I think, it helps me change how I show up, which ultimately helps me show up as a better man. Because then I'm able to come back into a conversation and I'm not activated the same way. I'm not dealing with the same pieces of shame, the same pieces of frustration. This is not a piece in my world. So then I'm able to actually deal with it. So Gail and I will run into different pieces. And one of the pieces that sometimes fights will come out of is simply one person not understanding. We both have a little bit of a trigger inside of, we're saying it very clearly in our minds, but the other person isn't getting it. And when that happens, sometimes our way of handling it is to say it again, and then to say it again, and then say it louder, and then say it louder with frustration. And it's almost kind of like we're like yelling at each other, being like, why don't you understand me? When in reality, if we just understood that we didn't understand each other, then we kind of pause. So it's a piece that we're still working on. It's a piece that we're growing and developing how we're showing up. But sometimes that's been part of fights. Different like clashes that's happened where I'm saying one thing, she's saying even sometimes the same thing, but we're saying it different ways. And when we can't understand it, or when we can't figure out what the other person is trying to say, then we get pissed off. Me more than her, but it still happens with both of us that we're still trying to work on and develop. I would say as a whole, fights have been completely different than what they used to be. There's not the name calling, there's not the yelling, there's not the raging out. All those pieces that used to be very prevalent, like every single interaction, every single argument, that was always a big part of my MO, which is how I was showing up, how I was yelling, how I was treating her. So now it's a different piece of being able to engage in a healthy way, being able to work through how we're talking, how we're considering, how we're processing different things, where before that wasn't even a thought process, that wasn't even an aspect. It was just, I was just going to do what I was going to do, and she just had to get over it. She just had to deal with my actions, with how I was showing up, with how I was treating her, how I was responding to her. So a big part inside of her healing has been being able to call me out. So inside of a conversation, she'll call me out in my tone, or she'll call me out in how I'm coming across, or she'll call me out in what I'm saying, or like, you're getting frustrated, like, and it's a piece that we'll both interact with more and we'll deal with more. Where before, it was kind of either swept on the rug or she was too scared to be able to say anything. Now there's a piece inside of her own healing and inside of everything that we've worked on as a couple of her being safe to actually say, no, you're gaslighting me right now. You're saying this, you're doing this, like whatever it might be, she'll just come out and just say it. And that's been extremely helpful just to identify it, because then for me it's oftentimes kind of like a misdirect. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, didn't realize that, you're right. I'm able to readjust in the moment, where before I wouldn't even have the awareness and I wouldn't be willing to do that. Now I can actually work on doing that inside of arguments and inside of fights. We're not free of fights. They still happen. They'll happen oftentimes when we're trying to expand and grow. When we're trying to develop who we are. When we're trying to develop a better connection mentally, emotionally, sexually, like we'll have different arguments and frustrations. Sometimes those are ones that we'll deal with and work through and figure out on our own. And sometimes they're ones that we'll bring into counseling and we'll work through with a counselor, because sometimes we're just not communicating. And I think this is helpful for a lot of people to realize that a lot of people do not communicate very well, especially when you're trying to communicate with someone else and they just don't understand what you're hearing. So sometimes we'll even repeat back, what did you hear? Or what are you hearing me say? Because if I do that, and if I get that kind of clarity, then I start realizing, oh, I said one thing, she heard something completely different. And the more that I'm able to actually see and understand how sometimes what I think I'm communicating, what she thinks she's hearing, or what she thinks she's communicating and what I'm hearing are sometimes polar opposites and extremely different. So that's one of the things that's also helped inside of the fights and inside of arguments, that they've radically decreased, radically different. Doesn't mean that we don't have those fights or discussions, but now I think the biggest piece is there's like a common theme and we're both working on together. Like even when you're like fighting, it's still like a piece of like togetherness. And the fighting together is like we're both fighting for something that we like or that we want. We're fighting for spending more time with each other. We're fighting for the kids. We're fighting for whatever it might be. Like we're actually fighting to grow and develop ourselves. And that's something that has taken us a while to be able to see inside of our own healing and our own growth, that sometimes we'll have an argument where we're adamantly fighting about something, or frustrated about something, or discussing something, and we kind of realize like we both have the same outcome and the same intention, but we're both trying to go about it different ways. That's been a huge piece. That's just been a growth piece that we're still working through. We're still growing, we're still developing, but being able to take out a lot of times the tone, being able to take out the frustrating comments, being able to take out the name calling, like all the abusive things, has really helped increase us having good fights. Like fights that we're actually saying, hey, we're fighting for each other and we're fighting for ourselves. So that means this matters to me and I'm going to actually deal with it. I'm actually going to fight for it. That's been really cool, and that's been really amazing to see. So I don't know if this helped at all. If it did, leave a comment. Let us know if this helped you at all, just in some of the perspective. But that's currently where we're at and kind of what's going on right now. If it does, we'd love to be able to help you inside the healing process. And if you connect with any of my content, you're like, hey, I want to know more, you can just go to realmotivations.com. We'd love to help you move forward inside of healing, growth, change, and development of who you actually are called to be and who you actually want to be. So this is just a little bit on the personal side. If it resonated with you, leave a comment. Let us know if you liked it or if you hated it, and we'll talk to y'all later.